Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Burger Time, brought to us by Data East. Burger Time is an all-time arcade classic and was ported over to many home consoles over the years, with the NES version being the version I have played the most. In Burger Time, you play as Chef Peter Pepper, and your goal is to make hamburgers, while being chased by an evil pickle, egg, and sausage. The arcade version of the game, as well as the NES version, features 6 different screens, and just like many other classic arcade games, your goal is to see how many points you can get. After completing the 6 screens, you'll go back to the first screen and keep going until you lose all your lives. In this run, I'll be completing all 6 of the first screens of Burger Time, so here we go. In order to make the ingredients for our giant hamburgers, you have to walk over the different ingredients. The best and easiest strategy is to start with the top area of the burger itself, of course the top bun, and what you can do is get enemies to walk along the bun with you, and when they get on top of it you can drop it down, either crushing enemies that are below it, or if an enemy is standing on the same level as you, the enemy will ride the burger down, going down several layers at a time, knocking down other pieces of the burger along with it. There are 3 different enemy types in the game, and the pickle enemy does not appear until level 3, easily the fastest and most annoying of the enemies to deal with in Burger Time. Like a lot of other classic arcade games, you can manipulate the enemies. Getting them to kind of follow you around, hurting them, is a great strategy for trying to keep them off your tail. The only thing is, the longer you're staying on levels, the faster the enemies will eventually become. You can't jump in the game, and you can't fall off of any of the ledges, so the only way to deal with the enemies is your pepper. You start off with 5 pepper, and you can get some upgrades to that by finding the items that appear in the center of the room, like the coffee, ice cream, or french fries. Picking up these will give you more pepper, and they appear after dropping a certain amount of layers of the burger down. After completing all the hamburgers, you move on to the next level of the game. Each of the levels are very uniquely designed with their ladders. Remember, since you can't fall off of ledges, ladders are the only way, and there's a lot of dead ends when you make it to the later stages of the game, especially 5 and 6. Since this is an arcade game, score is our main goal. To rack up score, we'll be crushing enemies, crushing multiple enemies at one time, and especially getting enemies to fall down different levels with you, knocking down all the ingredients in one go. The first few levels, since the enemies aren't too much up a threat, I'm able to herd them easier, and they're not super fast. I kinda just hit all the burgers, as I've never really been a person to go after a high score. I also have to say I am far from being an expert at Burger Time, so I'm sure there's some really cool strategies you can use in order to manipulate the enemies even better than I'm currently able to. Though hitting multiple enemies with a pepper shot is definitely a fun thing to do. Level number 3 is definitely where things start to get harder. Not only are the pickles introduced, the level itself is pretty hard to maneuver around. The first strategy I like to do is try to herd together some of the enemies at the very bottom. This way I'll be able to actually get up some of the ladders as the enemies have all spawned on the screen. While of course you'll want to take out enemies in order to rack up points, doing so of course will stop them from being all herded up, so you'll have to kind of re-herd them after taking out a group of enemies. It can be rather difficult in this stage in particular to try to get to the top and knock the burgers down. I find myself struggling with this stage more so than most of the other levels. I also tend to use a lot of my pepper while working on this stage. Once you can get down some of the basics for manipulating the enemies just a bit, figuring out when they're going to be coming at you, whether they're about to go down a ladder or up a ladder at you, or if they're going to come straight for you, you can start to kind of strategize a bit on whether or not you should stay in one spot and wait for them to kind of build up to try to drop the burgers down, or do you need to panic and run away before you get bombarded with enemies from all sides. Burgertime was a very popular arcade game, and because of that it did actually get some sequels. Unfortunately, the sequels and spin-offs were not available on most of the home consoles. In fact, only one of them, a sequel called Diner, which was an Intellivision exclusive, was the only other Burgertime game released for home console. The other two games, both in the arcade, Peter Pepper's Ice Cream Factory and Super Burgertime, never were ported over to any of the home consoles. There was a Burgertime Deluxe that was released for the Nintendo Game Boy, as well as a reboot to the series called Burgertime World Tour, which was released on more recent consoles like the Xbox 360 and PS3. We now move on to level 4, which looks like a pretty simple stage because it's all pretty much lined straight up. The ladders, though, are placed in an interesting pattern, and because of this, it definitely takes some getting used to, and you'll find yourself getting stuck in a few dead-end areas, not being able to get to a ladder quick enough to escape enemies. Like other levels, though, our goal is to start off at the very top, get enemies to step onto the buttons along with us, and then drop them down in order to cause that chain reaction effect of sending them down multiple different floors. Sometimes, though, even while setting this up, you have to quickly decide whether or not you'll have enough time to stand there before the enemies all end up surrounding you. Getting an enemy to stand on the buns or ingredients along with you right before you drop it down is the best way to rack up a ton of points in the game. This is also a level that I highly recommend beating as quick as possible. While all levels are difficult the longer you stay on with the increased speed, this one in particular is very tricky because of the increased speed and the amount of ladders the enemies can gang up on you and get to you quicker than they can on some of the other stages. Here, while being chased, I have to go up quite a few floors, but eventually I can drop down in order to hit that last part of the bun in order to complete level 4. Now, level 5 is a very unique design. You only have to make 2 burgers, however, to make them it can be rather tricky. You have 2 ladders that pretty much travel up the entire length. However, the left side of the screen, where all the burger pieces are, only have a few sporadic ladders in order to help you travel down. Getting to the top and dropping down the ingredients a few levels at one time with an enemy stacked on top of it is essential to getting this level going. Manipulating the enemies becomes essential during this stage, at least being able to read what an enemy is going to do. For example, the egg enemies will always travel down or up a ladder depending upon where you are. If you're above them, they're always going to go up. If you're below them, they're always going to go down, whereas the pickle enemies may change it up a little bit. Squishing the enemies is another good strategy here for being able to just get them off a screen for just a few seconds so that you can maneuver around. Having pepper left or being able to pick up pepper upgrades during the stage is also a key part for being able to maneuver around. Also, don't be afraid to travel all the way down to the bottom right corner of the screen in order to get the enemies to start chasing you down, and once they get down there along with you, going up and trying to work your way over to that left side. Trying to get down to that last part where there's 2 buns end up sitting is the hardest part of the level, since there's not a more direct path in order to get there, and you have to use all the ladders starting from the floor that I'm currently on. Thankfully, though, I'm able to get all the enemies up into the top part of the screen and then work my way down in order to hit those last 2. We now move on to the 6th and final screen of Burgertime. This one is back to the 4-burger format. All 3 enemy types are back, with the sauces not being included in the previous level, which was definitely a help, though that level was still tough. You can see during this stage, though, that there's a lot of dead ends. All the platforms on the left and right side don't have a ladder leading downwards on the edge, so because of this, you'll end up finding yourself running into that dead end and getting hit by an enemy the first time you end up playing the stage. Still, using the ability to get an enemy onto an ingredient is essential for not only racking up points, but being able to get through the level quickly. Though because of the enemies and the ladders, this can be either really difficult or easy if you're able to manipulate the enemies. Of course, they can't travel up and down unless there's a ladder just like you, and you can use this to your advantage. Here I was able to squish a couple of enemies right before I was able to go up that final ladder and get up into that upper right corner, but you have to be quick, because even taking out an enemy, you'll have one respawn immediately after hitting it. Here it's best for me to kind of just wait a few seconds to try to get an enemy to drop down along with the burger and manipulate the sausage in order to go over. Here, I drop the last 2 burger pieces and I'm able to complete level 6. The game, of course, then goes back to level 1, and you keep going, of course, to see how much of a high score you can get. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.